This episode is brought to you by ProMensal.
You are in control in that 10 or 15 minutes that you're in with the doctors. And if you don't go in prepared, you're likely to go in and start crying, tell them you don't feel great, get antidepressants, and then you're gone. It's happening to too many women.
Welcome to the second season of Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention magazine. I'm Andrea Duval, editor of Prevention. It's a funny thing that when we're in our late 30s, early 40s, the very thought of menopause is not on our radar, but in actual fact, our hormones are already starting to shift and change. And it's actually in these years, between about 35 and our mid-40s, that perimenopause often begins. It's not always the hot flushes we hear so much about. And so many of us struggle. You know, only 1 in 8 Aussie women seeks help for these problems. And doctors, unfortunately, can often fail to consider menopause the reason. So I got to thinking that when my little girl's about to hit puberty, our mums often sat down to have the chat about how our bodies were about to change. And what we really need is something similar to prepare us for what's ahead in this other time of hormonal change, which is called perimenopause. And that's where today's guest comes in. Amanda Thebe is an author, health coach, and runs a fabulous Facebook group called Menopausing So Hard, which has a global following. Since having her own battles with perimenopause, Amanda's made it her mission to support women all over the world going through this challenging time. And what you're about to hear is something I believe every woman embarking on her 40s should listen to. Amanda, welcome to Thriving in Menopause. You've written a wonderful book, which is really an essential guide for every woman journeying through her 40s. It's called, well, it's a bit of a mouthful, Menopocalypse. Amanda, why did you call it that?
I called it that myself personally, and I have a Facebook group, and I kept talking about being in the Menopocalypse. I was like, I was always ready for when the zombies were coming. I was always like, get me on your team when the apocalypse is here. But perimenopause, wiped the floor with me, and it just literally felt like the end of the world for me. And Andrea, it's just women are blindsided at this stage, and it's like, why is this happening in this day and age? Why are we not knowing what the hell is going on with our body? And that was essentially where it came from.
Well, what I love about it is that from your own experience, it sent you on a bit of a mission to learn as much as you could. And I think one of the cruelest ironies, as you say, is that during our 30s and 40s, these strange symptoms can appear, and menopause is so not on our radar. For God's sake, we're maybe 35, maybe we're 42. That's something that happens to old ladies, or that's what we have in our head. Perhaps you can explain to me what happened to you on your journey.
So you made such a great point, and you said that how are we supposed to know, what's happening to ourselves if nobody's telling us? But the same goes for the medical community. How are they supposed to know? They've never been told this in medical school. And that was something that I learned on my journey. So at 42, I started struggling with symptoms that literally changed the quality of my life. And my story, even though I'm going to share it, is going to sound so familiar to so many women, because we've all gone through it, it seems. We know that up to 75% of women will struggle with menopausal symptoms that they don't recognize. Mine were really strange. I got vertigo, felt dizzy, and then I would lose feeling in one side of my face. My vision would go. I'd start being sick, and it was just like it was like I was struggling with seasickness, something like that. Only the loss of feeling in my face was really scary. I started getting tests with neurologists, throat doctors, my own GP. I had all of these specialists for about 2 years trying to help me, and they came to no conclusive answer. And yet they were really helpful doctors. I actually had good health care. And it was when I went to my annual gynecology checkup that he just said, oh yeah, these are perimenopausal symptoms. You've got migraine with aura, and that's making you lose feeling in your face. And I knew that it wasn't anything to be scary of because I'd had all the MRI scans. And he was saying, and you are clearly struggling with depression. And I didn't know what that was. But I just thought I'd lost my whole personality and my mojo, my, lust for life, essentially. And, it was just such a relief for me to speak to this doctor. I don't think he realized how impactful he was in my life. And it wasn't just because he told me what was going on. It was because I've been searching for the answers for 2 years with nothing. And so I just think that although, we can say as women, nobody tells us how are we supposed to know, we have to broaden that net as well and say, there are plenty of people that can help us, but they need to know too,
We'll be right back after this.
Perimenopause can actually start in your 40s. Declining estrogen production during perimenopause brings on changes to menstrual cycles and often the onset of hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings, and sexual problems. Premensal Peri is specifically designed for perimenopausal women and can help relieve these common menopausal symptoms. Premensal Peri is available at leading pharmacies across Australia and offers a cost-effective treatment at under $1 a day. When things start to change, try Premensal Peri. Always read the label and follow the directions for use.
And that's why I think it's wonderful that your Facebook group, called Menopausing So Hard, now has over 12,000 members around the world sharing in a supportive way all their different experiences. You recently conducted a poll amongst the group to find out the most common symptoms members experienced, and the results were surprising. Can you talk me through what you found?
It's interesting because, like you said, we both in our 30s and 40s were like, menopause, it's not even on our radar. It's not tangible. Why do we even need to have the conversation? Blah, 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 blah. It's just something old ladies go through. And I think part of us as well think that menopause is something you go through and then it's done. It's a one and done thing. And so my mind, menopause was, you don't get your periods for 12 months and then you have some hot flushes and then, you just get on with things because nobody influencing us from our older generation are telling us any different. Isn't that right, Andrea? Nobody's talking about anything, right?
And I think that's the whole thing, that really this particular episode has to be sharing out to women in their 30s and 40s what's ahead, in the same way that our mums sat us down as little girls and gave us the talk about what was ahead.
Exactly that. And so I've never had a hot flush. And so I'm menopausal, I'm 50 years old, never had a hot flash. And so if I was basing my perimenopause and menopause experience on that one symptom, I would never know I was in it. It's interesting. But we know that essentially in perimenopause, we know that our estrogen is going to decline in a roller coaster type fashion. It fluctuates. It's not linear. And because of that, the symptoms will come and go and change along the way. Perimenopause can last us between 8 and 10 years, and no one woman's experience is going to be the same as anybody else's. And when I polled the group, I had people telling me symptoms that I think most people wouldn't typically associate with menopause. And there are things like insomnia, depression, anxiety, joint pain, migraines. Migraines was a big one. Lots of women struggle with headaches and migraines. Brain fog, literally forgetting words in the middle of a sentence. And those type of confusion and neurological impacts on women can be horrifying, because we know that Alzheimer's is such a big problem for women post-menopause. And so women often think that this is the early onset to it. So these are all typically symptoms that you would go and see a separate specialist for, or your GP might give you antidepressants for, because the GPs now are all over mental health. They don't want you to struggle with your mental health issues. So when you go to your doctor and say, I think I've got depression or my anxiety's out the roof, they're going to try and help you with that and almost never associate it with perimenopause.
And that's when you talk about the fluctuations too, that's an interesting thing, because one day you can be perfectly fine and the next day, as you say, you can forget your partner's name. You can forget what you were saying in the middle of a sentence. But then the next day you're fine again and you think, oh, it's just lacking sleep. It was just a thing.
It's completely true. And I think that's how we can get education out to them, and we can broaden this scope and just essentially say to them, if you're in your 40s and you are now being presented with symptoms that you do not recognize and that your quality of life has been impacted, the first thing that you should think about is this perimenopause? And that is essentially what the training for doctors is as well. We know there are 34 recognized symptoms, but let's be honest, there's probably like 50 or 60, because we can have all our variations of these different symptoms. And once you recognize that, within this symptom list, that you're saying, oh my God, my joints are aching, my tongue is burning, my eyes are dry. Like I have vaginal atrophy, which is obviously recognizable, but maybe you're
dry. It's a terrible word. Oh my God.
And it's actually not really used now. I think that the term is the genital urinary symptoms of menopause, GSM. And because vaginal atrophy isn't a true picture of what happens, because it isn't just the vagina that is impacted, because estrogen is all over the body, which is the next thing I was going to say, like that we have fluctuating estrogen, but the receptors impact almost every system in our body. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It protects our heart. It protects our joints. It helps things grow. So when we lose that protective factor of estrogen, the symptoms can come out of anywhere, basically, right? And so as far as like the GSM symptoms, it can show itself up as like prolapses or muscle degradation or urinary tract infections, constantly like having incontinence and dry sex, painful sex. It goes on and on and on. Like the symptoms are quite intensive, and the thing is with these symptoms is most women will likely have some sort of vaginal atrophy or GSM symptoms as they go through to old age. Most women won't look for treatment because they're too embarrassed to ask for it. We're maybe too private, or it's very difficult to talk about these things even with the doctor. Yet the thing is, the treatment for those type of symptoms is super simple, very cheap, and accessible to everybody. And so if we can sort of open that door that's a little bit more awkward to talk about, we can sort of be improving women's quality of life as they go through, into old age.
I like the fact that you suggest that one of the things that people should do when these symptoms occur is to create what you call a menopause tracker. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, and you can do this in a number of ways. I mean, there's a couple of apps out there. There's a Peri app, which is, like a menopause app. There's one called the Balance app, which is Dr. Louise Newsom from the UK. They've all got ways of like identifying what your symptoms are. But I'm like a proper good old paper and pencil girl. And I think most women who are listening to this probably are, we've all got our lists somewhere. And so for me, what I would do is, because I knew my symptoms couldn't be predictable, and I think that's the main focus we need to look at. Your symptoms, you can't tell what's going to happen because of the changing landscape that's always happening over these 8 to 10 years potentially. And then even through menopause, you may still have symptoms. You need to get a handle on what's going on. And so for me, what I would do is I would wake up. I used to give myself scores out of 10. Am I a 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, just based on my energy levels and how I'm feeling. And then would write down the main symptoms that were happening. And even though it wasn't a pattern, what happened is when I did go to my doctor, I went to a menopause specialist, I was able to say, it seems that like I've actually been struggling with depression for like 8 out of the 10 weeks, or, I've had incontinence and it's impacted me for a whole month, and it seems to happen, when I get my migraines or something. And so like, at least I had a list of symptoms to go to to the doctor with. And what I want women to be able to do is to be able to advocate for themselves, because they have to, because simply the doctors don't know. So I've given them the tools to be able to say, like, collate a list of the symptoms that you've got to be able to go to the doctors. And then, tell them about your cycle if that's impacted, because actually your period may or may not change. It depends, right? And then know what your treatment options are, because chances are the doctor doesn't know. And then if you can't get help from them, and then you can advocate to go for a referral to a menopause specialist. You are in control in that 10 or 15 minutes that you're in with the doctors. And if you don't go in prepared, you're likely to go in, start crying, tell them you don't feel great, get antidepressants, and then you're gone. It's happening to too many women when there are valid treatment options out there. And so I'm trying to give women the tools and the education to be able to go in and just say, I know what's happening. Help me. And this is how you can help me.
Yeah. And we should say that the Australian Menopause Society has GPs around Australia who've done additional medical training in midlife and menopause, so that they really are the best people to go to for expert advice and support. And we'll be sharing links to their website in the show notes for the episode.
And can I tell you, Andrea, as well, I really like that website. I've been on them all, of course. And what there is on that website is a symptom tracker. And I recommend that women in Australia go to the Australian Menopause Society, download that symptom tracker, tick everything you recognize. If you're not sure if you're in perimenopause, that's the easiest way to find out. And in fact, what we do know is that doctors do not get menopause management training. And even gynecologists, I don't know the number in Australia, but in the US, it's less than 20% of gynecologists will actually actively take menopause management training. So the numbers are quite small, and it's hard to find an expert. And so the fact that doctors actively search for training and then become registered with the Australian Menopause Society is such a bonus. So download the symptom tracker and then search for a provider in your area or someone that can prescribe to you, via Zoom.
Yeah. So this is a good news story, actually, because the resources are there. And part of this conversation is trying to share with our listeners that you don't have to struggle in silence. I'd also like to thank you, Amanda, for sharing insights into one of the less known impacts of menopause, and that is the loss of feeling connected to our partners and loved ones. Now, is this actually a hormonal phenomenon?
When we're breastfeeding and we have oxytocin coming in our system, like surging in our system, it helps us bond, when we feel that connection like none other with our child. And it also happens when you fall in love with people. And it's sort of like we all know what that feeling is like, but in perimenopause, there almost feels like a disconnect. And I knew that estrogen and progesterone were declining, but our endocrine system is super, super complex. I don't understand it. I never planned to either, because endocrinologists study it for 13 to odd years in school and still don't understand it, which is also one of my, please don't go to a hormone expert on Instagram, because they literally don't know what they're talking about. But we know that all of our hormones are intrinsically connected. And so this, when we know that estrogen and progesterone are falling, also oxytocin is falling too. And that's the thing that actually connects us to people. And so a lot of women do feel that they start pulling back and enjoy spending more time on their own and don't need to be super clingy to their partners or children. And I think that makes a lot of sense if you consider what menopause is. I mean, it's the end of our childbearing years. It's the time when we will no longer produce or have children. And so we sort of don't need those hormones like we used to, right? We don't need the connections like we used to. But I don't think it's a bad thing, right? It was an eye opener for me. And like everything in this journey, as soon as I knew what was going on, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And so now I'm okay with it. And I'll do what I need to do to cultivate my relationships in a different way. And so, even though I did pull away from my family a tiny bit, and I mean, I don't mean they didn't get dinner or anything, but I wasn't all over them like a rash, like I was in the past. allowed us to focus on myself a little bit more. And that's the phenomena that you're talking about. It's the we to me phenomena. Women typically just put all of their energy and focus onto other people, very rarely looking at themselves, very rarely thinking, what do I need personally to be able to thrive today? What do I need personally to be able to be the best version of myself I can be, that will then have that ripple effect and help every other single person that I have contact with? And that's one of the gifts of menopause to me. And it allows women to then make different choices. Do you want to get up 30 minutes early before everyone else and go for a walk and just be by yourself and just feel connected for the day? Like introducing some type of mindfulness techniques to be able to just really feel present and appreciate where you are. And that's the phenomena, and it's real. And I think once you're in the thick of it and you realize that you have to put yourself first as an act of self-preservation, it's pretty empowering, actually. I love it. and actually, nobody has ever once questioned me in my family and said, well, why does mum feel like she needs to sit outside with her coffee without me? They're like, yeah, let mum do her thing.
And in your book, Amanda, you share what happened in your own marriage. I think your husband was at a bit of a loss for a while, as most of our partners are, when they see you're somehow different.
Well, I was really struggling with depression and I didn't know. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. And my days would essentially be getting up early to work. I was a personal trainer, taking the kids to school afterwards, maybe training a few more clients, but then having this 4 or 5 hour dead spot in the day, which is typical for a coach, a personal trainer. And just being like sat on the sofa, staring into this like dark void, because I was struggling with depression, but I didn't know it. And, so I was basically putting on a face for everybody outside of my house, except for everybody in my house. And I remember my husband sitting down and saying to me, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself. And I mean, I wasn't myself. I mean, I was in a terrible place. And I just went crazy on him. And I literally tore him to shreds and told him all of the things I hated about him. And it was pretty terrible. Conversation, actually, because he just sat there and like took the shots from me essentially. And I walked away from him thinking, I don't even want to be with this man anymore. I can't stand him. And anyway, we sort of went into this terrible like period of time where my marriage was maybe not at risk, but I just was having those thoughts I'd never had before. Like, do I even want to be in this marriage? And interestingly, divorce rates peak in menopause, which is like maybe something we should dig into a little bit more. But and then when I went to see my gynecologist and he sat down and said, listen, your symptoms are valid. You do have depression and I need to help you with that. You do have migraines with aura and I need to help you with that. I then went to see my husband and we sat and had lunch together and I went, yeah, so I've got depression and I've got anxiety. And at the time I chose to go on antidepressants, and he went, oh my God, that's great. So you're not going to leave me then. He was just so relieved. He obviously didn't like the fact I had depression and anxiety, but he thought that the problem was
they
bigger.
can read the signs quite differently.
And in fairness, Andrea, like if you think about it, I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me. I changed as a whole person, body, mind, and soul. And I had this other person in my life who'd been with me nearly 20 years. And he just assumed the worst, because why would he know any different when I couldn't give him any answers? And then all of those things that I told him about himself, that I literally told him I hated about himself, I realized were his actual strengths and the reasons why we were together, right? And so I just couldn't see anything clearly. And I got to be honest, a couple of months into the treatment, I just felt this sense of calm and was like, I'm back and now I can take control of things. And while I'm not on an antidepressants anymore and I'm in a different place in my menopause journey, I do have moments of like real lows, but I recognize them now and we're very open in our communication. And I sort of say the warning signs are coming. I don't feel great. We need to be aware of this. And it's a different conversation these days. And that's what I think a lot of women are finding.
It's a different relationship this side of menopause. Yeah. We'll be right back after this. So, Amanda, you were describing how our relationships naturally change during menopause.
It's because it's just not relying on just hardcore cold sex anymore, right? There's like a little bit more foundation to it, yeah.
Yeah. As a personal trainer, you've also talked about how you see women who feel less capable and their inner belief is shaken, like, I can't lift that weight anymore. No.
Yeah, like I knew this was going to happen because years and years ago, one of my favorite sports physiologists, her name is Dr. Susan Kleiner in the US, did a presentation, and then I just became a fangirl of hers. She's just such a wise woman, and she just said, we know that women lose belief in their athletic ability. It's a true fact. And actually, a study came out last week that was saying that estradiol, the main estrogen in our body, has a direct impact on women's self-confidence and self-esteem. We see that happening. And I think probably through perimenopause, I personally felt that more than I feel now that I'm in menopause. And it's likely to be because of the uncertainty that's happening as well as these unpredictable symptoms. And you literally don't recognize the body that you're in. A lot of women will pull back from things they've previously done that make them thrive and actually, go in on themselves. And we know that this phenomenon is that they literally don't think they can anymore. I also felt that too, but I wanted to sort of just say it comes back. So I've been through the low points and definitely have reached some type of homeostasis in postmenopause that is seeing me stronger than ever, fitter and healthier than ever, because that belief is back. I feel like it's like a temporary phenomena that happens, but I hear it all the time. I can't do that. I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. And I'm trying to say to women, please stop the comparison trap. We know how harmful that can be. We have to work with where you are right now. And right now, that might not be where you want to be, but appreciate your body for what it can do. And it can probably do more than you expect it to, right? So it's working on the mindset of what are the habitual things you can do consistently, every day, small things, or a couple of times a week, small things that actually get those feel good endorphins going, and boost your confidence, because we know absolutely that exercise has a really positive impact on our mental and emotional well-being, not just our physical well-being, right? And so that's sort of where I think exercise plays a massive role in perimenopause, not just from the health markers and, getting strong and all of those things, but just to give women that confidence back. Because it's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than feeling like you can't do something when I know you can, right?
Yeah, and it comes back.
It comes back. And I think that that's the point of the book. Even though I called it Menopocalypse, I hope that the book gives women hope. I hope that the things that I talk about show them that they can do things that are proactively positive, and I'm adding things to their life.
All right. So now it's time let's talk about the positive stuff. So in an overview, what do you see as the upsides? As you've just said, you've gone through perimenopause, you're now in menopause, and you mentioned in the book that you gained a lot of strength from the battle. What would you say to women are the upsides?
We can do hard things, and we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that we're going to go through the hard times, and some women won't. Some women it will be fine, but when a woman is in the worst of it, the thick of it, it's really difficult to look forward and go, oh, but I know it's going to be fine. But we have to know that it's not going to be like this forever. And I think that that's the one thing that scares women. They feel like this symptom of, say, depression or these migraines are going to be with them till the day they die. And that's a very hard thing to cope with, right? And I sort of want to say to women that we know that most of the symptoms that you struggle with from a physical, emotional, and neurological standpoint, most of them will get better. You might have some things you need to deal with as you go through menopause, and as you age, but most of them you can You can do things to proactively feel better with, and there are treatment options out there. Nobody needs to suffer.
Amanda, that's a lovely way to end this episode. There's so much you and I could talk about, and I'd like to invite you back for another episode to describe to us your 4-point toolkit for thriving during menopause. I look forward to sharing that in a future episode, but that's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast, and also pick up a copy of Prevention magazine, where you'll find more great advice for thriving at midlife. My name's Andrea Duval. I'm editor of Prevention, and our podcast editor today was Josh Lundberg. See you next time.